안녕하세요. 브릿지 번역의 강기석입니다. 영어로 발표를 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 제가 편한 언어가 영어다 보니까요. Okay, today we're going to talk about overall growth of Korean game industry, global game industry and the market size, its forecast, game localization forecast and target language, bring this down, for Korean games, characteristics of game translation, importance of term base, and computer-assisted translation, CAT툴. And then we're going to have a little summary afterwards. Korean game industry, it's a big industry. It all started back in the late 90s with the growth of PC방, Internet Cafe. And initially, we had these games called StarCraft and Age of Empire. Mostly it's game brought in from the foreign country in America. And PC방, the Internet Cafe, really exploded the industry for Korea. And then afterwards, in 2004, it started to grow with an online game industry with NCSoft, Lineage 2, and then the Terra Online, Aeon. And then we started import more big mega hit games like WoW, that's a World of Warcraft, and LOL, League of Legends. Afterwards, Korean government and also Korean game industry saw the size, the scale of the game industry, and they figured, okay, it's time to make this into a big event. So they started to have what you call G-Star. It's an international game show. At once, it was like the third biggest game show in the world. But now we have other game shows in China, Japan. So it's still large, it's still a major event. And the game industry is getting a lot of attention throughout the world. And then in 2010, a whole new evolution occurred. There was an exponential growth of the mobile game industry with an introduction of iPhone and App Store. That became the game changer in the industry. The App Store made it extremely simple for even the small developers to enter the game market. And then came the smartphone Google Play Store. After that, the internet speed increased, allowing a higher quality game. And Korean government saw this. And around late 2010s, early 2010s, Korean government started to provide subsidy for game localization. In 2010, through KOKA, they were providing about $25 million at that time, about 25억 for just localization of mobile games. And then in 2013, that grew to about $5 million. 2017, that's about $8 million. And that's just strategically only for mobile games. And of course, there were other subsidies, other government grant projects for translation, for content that included the movies, the games, the comic books, or whatever it may be. But the mobile industry, mobile games alone, they had a specific grant for mobile game translation. Global game content market size. I think previous session already had this a little bit. Global game market size in 2023 is estimated to be about $217 billion, with just easy currency of 1,000 Korean won. That's about 220조. That's quite a large money for the global game industry. Korean game export and import size by platform. Yes, the previous session was probably about similar with this content as well. Total game industry, game export amounts to about $8.2 billion in 2020. And the import is 270 million. So yes, it's about 30 times smaller. And then when you categorize it, in Korea particularly, online export is still a significant amount, nearly $3 billion. And then the mobile is the biggest export with $5 billion. But unlike Europe, whereas the console game is very big market, Korea is not really into developing or exporting console game. Now here's a significant part, $8.2 billion. How significant is that? According to KOKA's 2020 Content Industry Statistics Report, Total content industry export amount was 11.92 billion, and of it, game industry accounted for 68.7%. Now 8.2 billion. This is nearly 6 times more than K-pop, K-drama, and K-movies combined. Now that was 2020. I remember doing this similar lecture at a university 2 years ago, and in 2018, it was more than 10 times. And then previously, when I was doing lectures in previous years, it was way more than that. So game export, ever since around 2015, game export has always been a significant amount of content export for Korean content industry. Game localization forecast and target language for Korean games. We see there's going to be a continuous growth of game industry, particularly in mobile game sector. Continuous double-digit growth in mobile game market. That's because of we think the mobile market, the device itself is pretty much saturated. That is true for advanced countries, and particularly in Korea. Korea, Europe, America, yes, almost everybody have mobile phones now, but we're not considering the developing country. The developing countries such like Indonesia, India, Pakistan, where there's significant population, there are still many people do not have a very advanced or very high quality smartphones yet. And as they switch over, as their nation's GDP becomes better, more and more people in those emerging countries are being able to afford high quality smartphones. And high quality smartphones are able to run and operate high quality games. So there's going to be a continuous uprising of widespread of smartphones in the emerging market and continuous increase of game market in these countries. And also technology advancement. Right now we have App Store and Android market. It's great, it's significant, it has supported the growth of game industry. And now we're adding one more, it's called Play to Earn, an NFT platform. I read a news article this morning about NFT coin from Vietnam that is very popular because players in Vietnam or in Asia or in Southeast Asia are playing these games, and they said the game is not fun at all, the quality is very bad, it's made by a Vietnamese company, but the players are awarded a token from playing these games, and they can sell these tokens in the toy market, in a coin market. So Play to Earn is a whole new game changer. I remember we talked about the PC room fueling the growth of game industry. We talked about App Store fueling the growth of game industry. I believe that Play to Earn is the next step that's going to fuel the growth of a new era in the game industry growth. This is a new concept of gameplay where players can earn money as they play. And it's a new sector that many Korean companies are focusing on. One thing we need to point out here, Korean government has not yet authorized or made it legal for game companies to do Play to Earn in Korea. WeMade is one of the first company to do Play to Earn, and they are exporting the games. WeMade games outside of Korea, players can earn the coin and trade their coins in the coin market. But in Korea, they cannot do this yet. So it's something that will have an exponential significant effect in the game once the government approves this in Korea. But whether they approve it or not, it's already happening in foreign country. And this is significant for the language industry because Korean games are one of the most successful games throughout the world. And if they cannot service these games in Korea, but they see a significant market globally, there's your outbound source. More games are going to be developed for Play to Earn platform, and more games, as they're developed, they're going to be developed and need translation. Current top languages. Now, we call it Tier 1 and Tier 2 in language industry. Tier 1 means from source language to the first transition. From source language to first transition, Tier 1, it's English, Chinese simplified, and Chinese traditional, and Japanese. That's a Tier 1 language for Korean market, Korean games. Of course, if you're a company like in America, your tier 1 language is everything because you start from English and English is going from everywhere. But for Korean companies, tier 1 language is English, Korean to English, Korean to Chinese, Korean to Taiwanese, Korean to Japanese. And then from there, we go to tier 2 languages. And then it starts from English to German, English to French, English to Spanish. More significant market in Spanish is not Spanish Europe, but Spanish in Latin America. And we mostly get Spanish Latin America translated from, mostly from translator from Argentina. Now, Brazil, that's the next tier 2 language. And it's not Brazil, but it's Portuguese Brazil. And then we have Thai, Vietnamese, and Russian. Russian is an interesting market. It all stopped not because there is no market, not because there's an internet problem. Russian translation has all stopped because there's no way for us to pay the translators in Russian. There's growing interest, and this interest is growing significantly. Indonesia, Italy, Turkey, Hindi, and Arabic. Italian language is an interesting thing, not just for Korean. For Korean, it's growing interest. It's not a significant market yet, but Italian for console games, previous session they would talk about console game. For console game, Italian is so large. In America, we call it FIGS, F-I-G-S. Anytime a game gets translated, it gets translated into FIGS, French, Italian, German, and Spanish. But in Korean games, Italy is just a growing interest. It's not that big market for us. Now is mobile game localization process. We talked about the market. Is there a market? Yes. Is it growing? Yes. So should we put an interest in it? Yes. Okay. Now how do we do it? Mobile game localization process. First, we get the game text, and previously there was a previous session. I think my session and previous session is related tremendously because we're talking about the same game localization. Talked about how come there is no images with the text. Can we have the game or images to go with it? Well, mostly, number one is a security reason. These games, to develop and to draw these games, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Or even a small game, it takes many years to make. And they don't want to disclose all the information to translators. That's a big, even though we have an NDA, the biggest issue is the security. We do not want to give images. We do not want to give the games prior to the launch is number one. Number two, we don't have it yet. The game developers don't have the game ready. They go to the text on it separately, they draw the image separately, and they're doing this together. And text is usually completed before everything else. And once we have the text and translation is being done, they feel that translation and text does not, the game developers do not feel this text is really significantly important as the images and the game. So they spend more time trying to improve on the images and the game itself. Text, they make it out and they put it in, and so that's why one of the main reasons why you don't have the text and the image at the same time translation. Now, when we get the text, the first thing we do is prepare glossary and style guide. We make a glossary, and we're going to talk about the glossary in the term base on the next slide. We get the glossary, we get the style guide, and then we do the tier 1 language translation, which is Korean to English, Chinese, Japanese, tier 1. After we do the tier 1, we review the Korean to English. Now, this is important. We review this really quickly. And this has to be done first because tier 1 has to be done first so that we can move on to tier 2. Chinese and Japanese, we can take time reviewing, but Korean to English, reviewing has to be done quickly before everybody else. And then we do the LQA. Of course, we talked about the LQA previously, so I'm not going to mention that. After we complete the review text with the English, we move on to the tier 2, the third languages. Again, after we complete that translation, we do the LQA again. Characteristics of game translation. Game translation is a combination of so many. You have technical translation because there's program codes in there. We need to handle that. And then it's a multimedia translation. Today's modern day games have such a high video graphics and there's so much recordings to involve. It's no longer just simple play the game thing and read the text and buy things. No, it's like watching a movie sometimes. So it has basic translation, localization process, which is converting source language to target language, then reviewing the translation and adding local culture aspect into the content. This is similar to any text translation you will see, any content text translation you will see, like books, movies, comic books, things like that, webtoons. And then you have character conversation. This moves a little bit more into like a movie, into a film. You have conversation, you have a video, you have voice dubbing, and then UI. Now, one of the key thing, and I highlighted this in yellow in game industry, in game translation, is consistency. You have to make sure that there is a consistency in the game. If one text says you need to go to a dungeon and kill a devil, okay? You need to go to a dungeon and kill a devil because demon, 악마, and you say a devil. And then you go to the a dungeon, you look for 악마, demon, or a devil, and you're there and you're killing it. But if it's translated to something else and you go to that dungeon or you go to a different dungeon in a different part, if there is an inconsistency in translation, there will be an error in the game. So consistency is highly important. And how do we maintain consistency in the game? Turn-based. What is it turn-based? It's very simple. It's 용어집. Very simple. And, excuse me. And it's turn-based is something that's we're going to need source language, the target language, and we want this to be repeated over again and throughout the consistency. It's a database of source language and target language, and it plays a key role maintaining consistency during QA. On turn-based, when we translate this, I'll give you an example here. 폐전방에 무덤을 떠도는 냄새나는 흙이 정령에서 정령의 핵을 구하시오. 냄새나는 흙이 정령. In English, we translated this in the first translation, text translation, as odorous earth. Okay, odorous earth spirit. 냄새나는 흙이 정령. But once we move to the review, the LQA process, and we change this to molderman. The molderman, it means molder means like a decaying, slowly decaying. And look at the image. It looks like it is decaying slowly. That's what we have. When we use a CAT tool, and this is why turn-based is important when we run a QA. If you run a QA, this is an image from MemoQ. And if you have the turn-based, the word highlighted after you do the QA, if you look here, there's a word highlighted, and oops, sorry, amphibious. Now this amphibious, in the translation, it says 첫 상륙 강습에, but in the turn-based, we put it as 수륙 양용. So the turn-based picks it up, QA picks it up from the turn-based, the word amphibious, says it's translated this way, maybe you need to check. That's why turn-based is important. This is another image of turn-based QA. This is in Chinese. Tool called Xbench. CAT tool. CAT tool is something that's a big topic in Korea, but outside of Korea and outside of Korea, especially game translation industry, we have been using these for years and years and years. It seems like it's just becoming a hot topic and hot tool in Korea. Well, here's a MemoQ, turn-based. Again, if you make a turn-based previously, glossary, and you put it in MemoQ before you start translating, then there is highlighted in yellow, and in the right side where they show the information, the turn-based. Inside the turn-based, it says bioroid, okay? Now, there are many tools in the industry. Due to the shortness, I'm sorry, I spent a lot of time in the beginning. We will catch up on I will just do the basic introduction of CAT tools. This is a MemoQ. It's probably one of the best specialized CAT tool for game translation. We have SDL CAT tool. If you look at it, MemoQ, SDL, very similar, very interface. And then there's another one called WordB. This is an online-based, internet-based, web browser-based translation CAT tool. MemoQ and SDL also has web-based ability, but WordB is very specialized on web-based. And popular CAT tool is MemoQ, Trados, MemSource, WordB. These are some of the popular CAT tools that many language industry use throughout the world. I am really sorry I took so long in the beginning. Let me get back to the summary. Importance of game translation. Global game industry, I emphasize again and again, it's huge industry with $200 billion and it's continuously growing. Revenue from game export is more than 6 times more than K-pop, K-movie, and K-drama combined, which means there's gonna be continuous growth of game industry. And I remember the professor in the previous session mentioned about, in the question section, about the compensation of translator. Shouldn't we be paying more to the translator? Actually, from my experience, game translators or the translator specialists in the game companies, in my experience in translation industry, is paid higher than any other industry that I know of. Importance of game translation education in university. And this is one of the main reasons why I'm participating in today's session. I wanted to emphasize how important it is for universities to foster these future specialists, because unlike traditional literature or general translation where language ability plays a key role, yes, game translation, language ability is very important. It's a unique field of translation that also requires a specially trained skill. Certain like literary translation, you just need to be very specialized in the language aspect. But in the game translation, it's something that can only be learned through training, whether it be university or other special places. And in addition to language ability, game translator needs to know how to use CAT tool, become familiar with game terminologies, how to handle program tags and other key aspects. And I believe that today's university is more qualified and very well prepared to train these, foster our future linguists for translation industry. And that's about it. I think I took a little longer than I should. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.